I'll just give a little bit of background about myself. My name is Angela Adduci. I work for the Bank of Montreal, BMO, large US presence, but it is a Canadian bank, 50-50 footprint between Canada and the US. I work for our Climate Institute, which is pretty unique at a bank. It's a research center of excellence within the bank that was really formed in recognition of the fact that climate change and all the associated risks and economic shifts are, it's a massive going area of concern for the bank, for our clients, for basically every part of the economy. And so about 5 years ago, BMO made a investment decision to pull together the Climate Institute as a resource to both our clients and our colleagues. So making sure that we were sort of on our front foot when it came to climate and all the different associated factors, drivers, risks, opportunities. So for me, what that means is a few different things. Part of my job is to engage externally on climate change, so making sure that we have an ear to the ground because this is a very rapidly developing sort of topic, cross-cutting topic, making sure that we understand what the conversation is, what our clients and other key stakeholders might be thinking about and what we might need to do in response. But then also internally, making sure that people who maybe don't have a background in climate change or don't know very much about it, who work at the bank, who are getting questions from their clients about it, feel confident having those conversations, because I think increasingly we are finding that if you're not prepared to have those conversations, you're losing business and you're losing opportunities. So, and then it's part of our purpose too, from like a moral business purpose standpoint. The bank recognizes that we have a responsibility as a large financial institution to be a responsible player around this and understand what's going on and understand the role that we have to play in the energy transition. So it's a pretty unique role. I would actually love to understand kind of the background of the people in the room. Is it okay if we go around? And I would just like to know, like, are you undergrad, are you grad program? And if so, like what program? That would be really helpful to me.
Hi, I'm Yukta. I'm first year Master in Public Policy student at Harris.
Awesome.
I'm Gaurav Raphael, also Master of Public Policy at Harris.
Ibrahim, also MPP at Harris.
Well, okay, my name is Sophia, and I'm also an MPP student, but my focus is in energy and environment.
Great.
My name is Maddie, and I'm a first-year undergraduate student.
Awesome.
My name is Harmony. I'm a third-year undergraduate in urban environmental studies and architecture.
Cool.
My name is Bella, and I am also an MPP at Harris, first year.
I'm Sam, MPP MBA.
Awesome.
I'm Eliram. I'm a Master in Management at Booth.
Very cool.
Hi, I'm Ashwin. I'm Chicago Booth alum, and I work for the Federal Reserve. So.
Oh, awesome. Very good.
Hi, I'm Xinwan. I'm also a second-year MPP student, and my latest internship was in the WRI China, the World Resource Institute. So I'm really focused on the INGO career and also the climate change projects.
Very cool.
Hi, I'm Zubair. I'm also a first-year MPP at Harris.
Awesome.
I'm Mustafa. I'm also a first-year MPP at Harris.
I'm Joe. I'm a third-year undergrad.
I'm Fatila. I'm on the staff at the Institute.
Yep. Also, Katie, I'm a staff at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth. We are sponsoring this event tonight.
I'm Genevieve. I'm a second-year undergrad studying climate and sustainable growth.
Awesome.
I'm Laura. I'm also studying climate and sustainable growth.
I'm Free. I'm a first-year student as the social sciences program, and my concentration is quantitative methods and social analysis.
Cool. Do you wanna?
I'm Donna. I'm also a first-year MPP at Harris.
Awesome.
I'm Joel. I'm also the first-year MPP.
Great. And then.
And I'm Riley. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate in economics and law.
Okay, awesome. That's really helpful. So it's like a good mix of undergrad, mostly MPP, some MBA. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I can just kind of, I guess, reflect a little bit maybe on my career journey and my role. And then after that, just maybe my booth experience. I'm a booth grad. I was in the evening weekend program, so I graduated in 2024. So I worked while I did it and had a great time, and I felt like I learned a lot. And I feel like just even with the Institute and everything, University of Chicago has changed so much since I graduated, even though that was like a year and a half ago. And just having the Institute, like, I think is so incredible and so necessary. So really happy to be here and happy that the Institute exists. Awesome. So like I said, I mean, my role is pretty unique and pretty broad, but I do think that financial institutions are increasingly seeing climate not as like, I would say it's not like a sector. Like, it's not like a sector like agriculture or commercial real estate or transit. Like, it's not that well defined. I think it cuts across virtually every sector of the economy. And so, like, when I think about my role, I think that it makes a lot of sense that a bank would want to have very broad subject matter experts working in-house to understand how climate is impacting all the different, more discrete sectors where they operate, because I think it's far more, it's highly complex how it impacts, the economy, our clients, the policy impacts, and I think it's very difficult to get your arms around. It's very multifaceted. Climate could mean anything from physical risk to economic shifts to transition risk. It could mean new technologies. It could mean opportunities around climate technology. It could mean needing to think about different ways of doing urban planning to integrate resilience and adaptation. Like, it's like almost everything you could possibly think of, right? And so that makes it very difficult when you're working for a business or a corporate or an organization that has kind of a profit-driven mandate to really, in a sophisticated way, get your arms around. And so it makes sense that I think my organization decided we needed to have this almost internal think tank because we are quite nimble and quite undefined. For me, I think from what I've seen, roles like mine and like internal groups like mine are becoming more and more common when I speak to my peers. I think that, and this is probably not unique to climate, I would say just because things do advance in a way more rapid way, and that's just going to continue. I think having expertise that is not just deep but also nimble is becoming a lot more important at a lot of different organizations, not just a bank, but like that is a skill set that I think is very hard to define, but being able to apply the knowledge that you have in this space in a way that pivots quickly to what is important is increasingly necessary. So I'm not surprised that teams are starting to be structured in this way. My career path, I graduated from Notre Dame in 2016. My first role out of college was with Argonne National Laboratory, which is under the Department of Energy. It's affiliated with University of Chicago. I was with our Argonne's Risk and Infrastructure Intelligence Group. So really what that was a team internal to Argonne that worked with entities like the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA. We worked with NATO at one point to look at our country's infrastructure and look at essentially all the risks. So look at grid, transit, power markets, water, infrastructure, and then any type of risk that you could possibly imagine happening to that infrastructure. It was our job to understand it, quantify it, communicate it, and then often bring together stakeholders who needed to be talking to each other and often weren't. So for example, we would put together these workshops where we would look at the grid in a certain part of the country in a certain state. We would say, okay, if there was let's say terrorist attack or a natural disaster that impacted the grid, who would you call? Who would be your first call? And just getting corporations, energy providers, local government into the same room and talking about that ended up being a lot of what I did. And, obviously a huge threat to infrastructure is climate change and just the associated impacts. So not just physical risk, but also as we look to decarbonize and we sort of electrify everything, a lot of our infrastructure was not built to handle that. And so there's not just like the physical risk of climate change, but as we seek to mitigate, there are, secondary impacts on a lot of our systems that were established for a certain kind of steady state, and they're changing very rapidly. And so a lot of what I ended up looking at was like, if there's a natural disaster, what's the load loss to the grid? But then if there's a huge ramp up in electricity demand, as we're currently seeing, what do we need to do to enhance or improve how we think about power systems, how we think about modernizing our grid? And so a lot of the work that I did 10 years ago that at the time I was kind of like, yeah, maybe, it's now very, very relevant because we've had 20 years of electricity demand staying flat. And now it's like, we don't know how much it's going to go up over 5, 10, 15 years, but we do know it's going to go up. And so that was kind of where I started my career. And I really enjoyed that. I found it very rewarding to work in government, with government, and kind of across all the different stakeholders. It was a very unique opportunity because I think at National Labs, most people are postdoc. I was working with some really, really, really smart people as a 22-year-old, and I felt very fortunate to be able to do that. And again, a lot of those people are affiliated with University of Chicago, so it was cool to kind of come back to Booth and have that connection. After about 3 years with Argonne, I went to Aon, which is a large financial services brokerage in Chicago, headquartered out of Chicago. There was an opportunity to work on government as a client there with a focus on climate change, clean technology, renewables, things like that. Aon is big in the insurance space and a lot of focus on risk management, and they were doing a lot of work to understand how private sector risk management principles could be brought over to the public sector because, like, when you think about it, as natural disasters increase in frequency and severity, we continue to build in areas and develop in areas that are increasingly impacted due to kind of mismatched incentives. And so what we did a lot of thinking around is how do we bring risk management structures and kind of vehicles and structuring over to government so that when natural disaster hits, if you think about it, like your revenues go down, especially if you're a tourism economy, but your outlays go up because you have to, help people recover from the disaster. So that's a huge mismatch. And we were thinking about different risk transfer mechanisms that we could bring over to government that were already being used by the private sector. Things like resilience bonds, things like disaster bonds, things like risk transfer mechanisms, reinsurance, different types of insurance, and how could we help the government be more innovative in how they were thinking about it to the extent that it was appropriate for the government, but how could we bring these great lessons learned over from the private sector and often from non-governmental organizations to the government to put into practice where appropriate to best serve the communities where they operate and not just respond to natural disasters, which I think often is the case, we respond, but to build in resilience ahead of time by making it so you could front load those funds as opposed to backloading them and just building back to the same standard. So I was with Aon for about 5 years doing that type of work. It was really, really interesting. I worked with the Treasury, I worked with FEMA, I worked with various state and local governments, and I think it was a really interesting crash course in just the different incentives that different organizations that are involved in disaster recovery and disaster preparedness are working with and their own mandates, and often like an understanding of like, yeah, we should be implementing resilience. We should have a more forward-looking building code, but for any number of reasons, like the MPP people in this room like are probably intimately familiar with this, like it just doesn't happen. And so I found it to be often a little bit discouraging, but ultimately it was a really good way to learn how to communicate with people based on what they care about. Because from my perspective, a broker at Aon cares about way different things than a government official, and they care about different things from an insurer. And so, but everyone is kind of trying to work towards the same thing, but if you can't communicate that issue or challenge or solution to them in language that they're used to hearing or language that they are comfortable with, then it was just kind of dead in the water. So I found that to be a really fascinating experience. And I really valued being able to work with government in some capacity. And I found it to be fascinating. While I was there, I was getting my MBA at Booth. And I knew that kind of when I wrapped that up, I wanted to work for a bank. I do see capital providers as a pretty strong lever that we need to be smarter about deploying toward climate and the energy transition and resilience and all these things that maybe it's not that the willpower isn't there, but it's that the expertise is not there. And so I thought that I could probably best use the unique sort of set of skills that I had developed between my climate work, but also my time at Booth to go work at a bank. And so right around when I was getting ready to graduate, this role opened up at BMO. And I applied and I got it. And I feel like it's a very unique job, but again, like I do feel like most jobs in climate are becoming quite unique. Like there's really no standard. I remember getting out of undergrad and being like, I wish that I had like a very set path. Like I wanted certainty. I wanted it to be like, when I graduate, I'm going to be an analyst, and then I'm going to be a senior analyst, and then I'm going to be associate. And then like I wanted it to be laid out, but no part of my career has worked that way. And I think that that has been really beneficial to me because I think if I had planned to be in the role that I'm in now and tried to like prepare for it and like almost like have a chart my path that direction, I don't think I would be in my role. I think I would have probably made some decisions that would have steered me elsewhere. And so I think through all of it, I feel very fortunate that I got the education that I got both here and at Notre Dame, because I think a lot of what I learned, I was a political science undergrad major and then MBA at Booth. And I think a lot of what I learned was how to, like these high level skills that allow you to be flexible and kind of pick your next spot, like without feeling like you're boxed into something. And I find that in the field of climate, that has been incredibly important. I think over the last year or so, we've seen a lot of policy changes that like require us to be nimble in how we not only think about climate, but how we communicate about it. And like my specialty is policy. And so like I went from last year tracking like the incentives that were available to our clients to this year tracking the legislation that was sunsetting some of that, some of those incentives. And so like both of those things, very important, but I needed to be able to shift my thinking and also communicate it. I think we've seen just broadly since I graduated, we've seen a pretty strong shift from like in 2016 through like 2021, there was a lot of purpose and values focused language, especially for corporates around climate. And like that's definitely a piece of the puzzle, but I think it was leaving out like a huge chunk of what is important, which is that there is a very strong risk management case to be made. There's a very strong value creation and value preservation case to be made. there is reputational risk, there's commercial opportunity around things like climate tech investment. And I think that, a lot of the shift that I personally have seen and experienced is that we have had to go from using very values-based language to being able to communicate to a risk manager or a director of strategy or a CFO about why they should care and why they should invest time into doing things differently. And so I have found that to be a difficult exercise, but also quite valuable when it comes to actual business outcomes. And so I would say I'm interested in seeing how that continues to evolve, but I think we're going in a direction where everyone sort of has started to get a lot crisper with how they speak about this. And that's been an exercise for me as well. And it's been quite interesting. So I just talked for what felt like a really long time. I would love to if there's any particular direction that it would be interesting for you all for me to take it, I'm happy to keep talking, but I would love to pause there for a second.
I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with risk management at the bank and how you talk to firms. How are you talking through the challenges of maybe you don't want to invest in Miami over the next 50 years?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because people do continue to invest in Miami, right? Even though it's really increasingly hard to get insurance. And part of the reason for that is that the fundamentals are sound outside of climate. But climate, it's huge. It's going to be uninsurable potentially. And so that's a really good question. I would say, as a bank, we have a whole portion of our risk management division that's focused on climate stress testing. A lot of that is scenario analysis that's mandated by our regulators, especially because we are Canadian. The regulator up in Canada has mandated certain analyses that we have to undertake to be a responsible financial institution. We have to do certain things to understand the climate stress on our portfolios, understand where our risk is concentrated, things like that. So I would say I recently published a paper that looked at resilience of the built environment, so commercial real estate. And it was really interesting because we have a huge footprint in commercial real estate. Most banks do, all banks do. And we were looking at things like putting up flood protection barriers, a very low cost mechanism for resilience, but often not explored by people who own these assets, especially if they have a very large portfolio where risk is spread out. But if you look at it over the lifetime of a building, 30 years, you can get a massive, what I would call return, but maybe some people wouldn't call it a return. But if you upfront invest in this resilience enhancement, you can actually realize quite a bit of avoided losses on the back end. And that is so difficult to communicate, is what I would say. Because how do you communicate an avoided loss, and how do you underwrite to that? How do you capture the value of that? And I think that that is something that as an industry, we're all sort of going along with figuring out together. And it's not that anyone's oh, I don't care about this, but often it's well, I don't even understand where I would start with this. It's often very difficult for people to get their arms around if they're a highly specialized commercial real estate asset manager. They understand what insurability is, and they understand what risk is, and they understand building codes, but they might not understand the value, how to quantify the value of going beyond that, which is what they have to do. They can't just do it because they say, oh, this seems good. They have to be able to make that case because it's an extra, X amount of dollars on top of, and they have to generate returns. And so it was a very interesting exercise. We looked at an identical building over like 8 different US cities. And we said, okay, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the physical climate hazard risk to each of these buildings based on where they are. And then from there, we're gonna look at where the biggest value at risk to the building is over the lifetime of the asset. Or I think it was only over 10 years looking forward. And then we're gonna quantify that. And then we're gonna look at if you implemented a high impact resilience measure, what amount of that value at risk goes away. And it was very impactful what they found. There was something like a 1 to 43 cost benefit ratio, which is kind of a no-brainer, but it's tough to put it into financial terms, right? Because again, if you can't underwrite to it, it's mispriced. And there's no way to get past that until the risk is appropriately priced by something like an insurer or a bank, like a lender. And so like what I would say is something like that is like a good first step toward, it was almost like a good faith effort to speak the language of someone who would be making those decisions. Because like I can say, resilience is good and we should do it, but unless I'm saying, and here's how much money it will save you, here's the competitive advantage it will provide you over your peers, here is the risk management principles that this supports, here's the government incentives that are available to help you do this. Unless I can say those things, it's really not going to resonate, and it almost becomes, it almost works against you if you can't communicate in that way. Like it's almost like you're just not going to be taken seriously because you can't communicate it in a way that people are used to hearing. And so I think it's an ongoing sort of process to learn how to, like we're all getting there together, like the data has to be there and the research has to be there, but we also have to be very mindful about how we communicate it. Otherwise, it's just not going to be taken as seriously, and it ultimately will be a waste of time if it just sits on the shelf without being appropriately communicated. So it's definitely an ongoing challenge, especially in markets like Florida, California. I don't have any answers for what will happen there, but it's just going to continue to grow as a concern for many different, for government, for insurers, for banks, for homeowners, for asset owners. So it's something that we just continue to try to help and make progress on.
I have a question, sort of Fed and non-Fed related. So I know we have pulled back some of the policies, when you talked about risk implications, we also go through some stress testing to see how the institutions are doing. You touched on a little bit about your regulations coming from Canada. Do you see a lot of change now in the US that is forcing you not to do some of these things versus you still doing it because of your your main organizational impositions?
Like the stress testing? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's very odd working for a bank. It's been a very weird time to work for a US-Canada bank. And I think our main regulator is OSFI up in Canada. And yeah, like I said, they mandate certain stress testing for us. I would say, I don't think we have to comply with that. So we continue to do that to the extent that it's required, to make sure that we're complying, and also to make sure that we're being responsible with how we are managing our own portfolios. I think even beyond the regulation, there are many things that we would still be doing even if it wasn't required, because it's important for us to understand, where our risk is concentrated. I would say what the regulatory environment in the US shifting just means that a lot of that is at our own discretion beyond what is required by OSFI. So I wouldn't say that there's a sense of like, don't do that. It's just not mandated in the way that it might be in a different regulatory environment, but it continues to be very important to us from a business perspective because, like, again, that's our risk, and we need to we have to quantify it, we have to understand it, and then we have to know what to do with it. Like, in some cases, we may not be able to hold it, we might have to transfer it, and so it continues to be important. I think it's just, are we bounded by regulators on it, or how are we doing it if we're just doing it at our own sort of impetus? It's probably very interesting to think about that from a Fed perspective. Yeah.
I mean, we aren't regulating anymore, so we are also not collecting any data anymore, so it's hard to say. But you bring up a good point. If it makes business sense, it's easy to sell. It's also risk mitigation from your standpoint. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would, like I said, that's like the biggest shift that I've seen, is even as certain policies have gone away, even as certain incentive programs have gone away, I mean, a lot of those programs have done their job, which in a lot of cases was to build data and like sort of be first of a kind, and then allow private sector to take it from there, or just even prove out something. Like, it's what happens with commercializing technology, right? Like, sometimes you need that like bridge funding, or like you need to get them to that first milestone where you can prove that something works, and then oftentimes another stakeholder will pick it up and take it. And so I think the purpose of a lot of those government programs was to do that. And in many cases, maybe they didn't get to the point where they were able to do that. But for things like, if you look at solar has just seen such a hockey stick because it's been proven out, and it continues to get cheaper and cheaper, and more important with electricity demand, with things like energy, the need for energy resilience and independence, with things like maybe certain parties wanting to be independent from the grid, stuff like that. It has been really, really interesting to see that happen with solar. And I mean, it just needed to be proven out first for many different types of customers to feel like, oh yeah, this can save me this amount of money, or this is proven to work. And so, like, I guess one thing I would say is that a lot of those government programs have done their job in that sense. In another very real way, I'm a little bit nervous to see a lot of those incentives go away, because I think that not everything has gotten to that point. What is interesting is there are certain technologies that are being funded and supported still that are very early stage. There's a lot of work going on around geothermal. There's a lot around battery storage, energy storage, grid enhancing technologies, carbon capture. It's been really sustainable aviation fuel. Like, it's been very interesting to see what continues to get like investment or blended investment versus what is just kind of like out there waiting to be picked up again. And so, like, I'm sure in a year even it would be a totally different conversation about what's moving, what's not moving. But I would say, like, the policy dialogue was very doom and gloom, especially like mid-2025. And what I have seen has been continued crowding in to try to like harvest tax credits that are going away, but also because in a lot of cases, this does make pretty strong economic sense to continue to invest in and continue to purchase and lend towards. And so when you look at the maybe reality on the ground, it's a lot more nuanced, and I would say a lot more optimistic than if you just read like an article, because there's just a lot that was in motion that continues to be in motion. And also, the United States is not the only country in the world. Like, there's a lot of countries that are moving forward with a lot of these technologies, continuing to subsidize, continuing to move forward on things. And so it's been interesting to take kind of that perspective with Canada and say, okay, there's just a very different environment happening, and just remembering that, like, those things continue to move forward, and like we are not the only player that's responsible for driving that forward, and other countries do continue to think about these things and create use cases and, again, provide that data that will allow private markets, private sector players often to pick things up and run with them. So very, very interesting year to be a policy specialist, but a lot more gray than I think a lot of what it initially seemed like. Yeah.
I'm curious about, like, you talked about some of these initial steps in pushing the needle on climate in terms of like tax credits or data collection, and I think we can all agree that like no matter who is going to be president in 2028, it's going to be a different political situation. So what are some of the like policies or technologies that are kind of emerging now or like being talked about that you think would be the most impactful to the work that BMO is doing in 2028 when that time comes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So things that I'm excited about, we do a lot of work, and this is, I know that people have mixed feelings on this, but we do a lot of work on carbon capture and storage, and it is really, really fascinating because, one reason that we do a lot of work in it is Canada is very geographically favorable for carbon capture and storage because of the large amounts of land that are favorable for injection and underground storage of carbon. And so I just continue to be fascinated by everything that is happening there. And I just, I know only a fraction of what, many of our internal technical specialists know about it, but I think it is really interesting what's happening on that front. Just from a technology perspective, it's pretty amazing to me that we can do that. And then the interplay with things like carbon credit markets and just the direction that is moving is very, very fascinating to me. Because if you look at the carbon markets, there's really just a few players really dominating, like Microsoft, Frontier. And so it's been really interesting to see at what point will there be a dilution of the players in that market? And I don't know, but it's been really fascinating to watch that develop. I am a big grid nerd just from my time at Argonne, and I think it continues to be something that we need to pay more attention to, and that everyone seems to agree we need to pay more attention to, but nobody quite knows what to do about. I think it's a pretty bipartisan thing. I think on both sides of the aisle, everyone's yeah, we need to make sure that our grid is maintained. We need to make sure that we can meet the moment of the electricity demand that we're experiencing. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting startups and companies and just big thinkers in the infrastructure space that are doing a lot of really cool work around the grid and how you can kind of reduce load or how you can shift away from peak demand. And it's really fascinating to me how that works. And so that is something that I think will be really important in 2028. I think that there's been a lot of talk about permitting reform and how do we get projects online faster? How do we allow for updates and grid hardening in a way that isn't bogging everyone down with red tape? I don't know I'm hopeful that will happen because I think that it's something that everyone sort of agrees upon, but I guess we'll see. But I'm excited to see where that goes. And then the last thing that I'll say, and I don't know if this is a technology that I'm excited about, but there's been a growing focus for us around water. So water scarcity, water conservation, responsible use of water, water technologies, and the value of water. We have a pretty strong footprint in the American West, so it's very important to us. It's the communities that we operate often experience water scarcity. And so there's just so many different dimensions to that where, there's a policy dimension around who gets what water and why. But then there's also certain businesses are high water users, and how do you sort of balance that across like all the different people that have a vested interest and incentives in water being used different ways. I think that there's a lot of interesting technology being developed around water. There's a really cool climate-focused VC in Chicago called S2G, and one of their thematic areas is water and ocean. And I think it's really, really cool what's happening in that space. And it's a massive challenge, and it's very stressful to think about, but it's something that we think about a lot because, again, like a lot of local economies rely on water, and that's our business, that's our people, that's our clients, that's our operations. And so increasingly an area where we are trying to be smart and think about what do we need to do, who do we need to support, and how do we forecast this? It's just like the ripple effects of water are just, that was a pun, they're crazy. Like it's so, like you think about water as foundational to like so much of what we do. So I don't have like a specific technology there, but I think that just continues to be a growing area of focus that has very, very significant implications for really all of us.
Do you think other financial institutions are thinking as much as BMO is around climate resilience, etc.?
That's a good question. I hope that they are. I really hope that they are. I think what makes BMO a little unique is that I don't work in a business line. So like my job is not revenue driven. My job is more like outcome driven. And sometimes that has to do with revenue, but sometimes it just has to do with like, did we know what was going on? Or did we publish something that helped our clients, right? And so I can't confidently say that every bank has a function like that, but I can confidently say that all large financial institutions have some sort of sustainable finance team, some sort of team either in their, like on the smaller commercial side or in their capital markets, that's responsible for things like green bonds, for things like lending towards resilience. I know that they're all doing kind of climate risk stress testing. I don't know that they're all thinking about it the way that we do, but I do know that like every large bank has a viewpoint on this. And I would say for every large financial institution, I would be extremely shocked if they don't see it as significant, if not just in a like economic environment sense.
So when it comes to investment, I wonder if you've seen any like commonalities in the climate tech companies that are doing well or have been able to receive, large amounts of capital or loans by those that have not done well or have just not been able to get any money?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the areas that continue to be very get a lot of traction are the areas that are like really major parts of our economy that are sort of ripe for climate impact. And so what I mean by that is like real estate, like that's a thing that can be impacted by climate change and natural disasters. So there's like a very well-defined need there for climate technology, whether it's through decarbonization and retrofitting and energy efficiency and stuff like that, or if it's like, here's how you make your building more resilient, or here is modeling that will help you understand the risk to your building. So that would be one. Another would be agriculture. Again, that's like a real physical thing that can be pretty severely impacted by climate, both in the short term, like year-to-year physical impacts, but also in the long term, as climate shift, you can't grow in certain things where you used to be able to, and that's a huge thing for communities to grapple with. And if you used to be able to grow almonds here and now you can't, And then on top of that, there's an almond glut. So like the prices are down. Like it's just a very tangible thing to like kind of get your arms around. So agriculture is one as well that I think continues to see a lot. Energy has just been like huge from any angle. Obviously, like AI is very dominant right now in terms of how we're thinking and where investment is going, particularly for like VC, but other areas as well. And so I think anything that sort of ties into what that is going to do and what it is doing to electricity demand is it's like immediately like gets attention and feels quite relevant. So I would say like those are my three big ones that seem to be getting a lot of like traction. But I mean, it's also case by case. Like there's a lot of bad technology out there that just doesn't scale. And so it's often just like, you know, who's got the best idea. Yeah.
Kind of shifting things more to like the career aspect. I'm just curious, like, what does your day-to-day look like? Is it like a lot of research or just curious about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do a lot of research. I do, like I mentioned, I'm like the internal climate policy person. And so a lot of what I do involves staying on top of what's happening from an incentives perspective, both in Canada and the US. So what tax credits, what funding might be available via government channels. And that's always shifting. So I kind of maintain that internal tracker of knowledge for my colleagues. And just act as like a subject matter expert there. But also like broader policy. Like if the SEC says something about how we're thinking about how companies are thinking about climate disclosures, even if that doesn't immediately impact us, it impacts our clients. And so being able to track that, communicate it, and pass it along to the relevant people is very important in my day-to-day. So I feel like I spend a lot of time just like looking at those data sources for policy, for government movement, and then discerning like what's important, what would someone care about, who would care about it, and then passing it to the appropriate person. I do a lot of research and like publishing. So I mentioned my real estate paper. That took a long time, and that involved an external partner who did a lot of the climate modeling, and then we were involved in a lot of the financial analysis. So that is something that takes a really long time to get done and get everyone to agree on. But then once you publish it, you don't want it to just sit on a website. So a lot of that has involved speaking on panels, going out and making sure we're having conversations with people who don't have sustainability in their job title, because those people already kind of care and understand. So instead doing things like going out to like a REIT or a commercial real estate investor and trying to have a conversation with them about what this means for them, how they think about it. How could we build on this data that we have to make it more decision useful for what they're trying to do? So a lot of dialogue with people around that. And then I do a lot of, I would say, internal education. So I have a lot of, internal banking colleagues whose day-to-day doesn't have the word climate in it, doesn't have the word sustainability in it, but they get questions. And so we need to make sure that like such a broad like swath of people has the resources that they need to have those conversations and knows where to go. Otherwise, it provides less value to the people that we're supposed to be helping and attending to the needs of. If we can't have those conversations, then we're not doing that. And so making sure that my internal colleagues kind of feel prepared in that way. And then just sort of, like it's similar to the policy thing, but just kind of keeping an ear to the ground and making sure that as things develop, we're on our front foot rather than sort of realizing 6 months later that everybody else was lending into this space and we didn't even think about it, or we disinvested in it, and making sure that something like that is less likely to happen if we understand the way that the market is going, what our competitors are doing, what our peers are doing, which way the government is going. All those kind of feed into understanding where we put our time and capital and resources towards, so that we can not just support our clients and other stakeholders in this, but so that we can do it in a smart way that is ultimately going to allow us to continue to operate profitably. So it's kind of all over the place. I mean, it's tough to describe a typical day. Today, I think I just made presentations all day, which was like, it was nice to come here and talk to people after that. But I feel like a lot of it just depends on like where the environment is at and what's going on.
Kind of following up on that, do you have any favorite newsletters or news sources that you follow regularly?
Oh, I love that question. Okay, she asked if I had any favorite news sources, and I do. I love Bloomberg. Bloomberg Green is a really, really good, just summary newsletter on what's going on. Everything I say is just going to be a little bit skewed towards business and banking, but I love Bloomberg Green. I love Wall Street Journal, Sustainable Business, and these are all free. Like, you have to subscribe to read the articles, but sometimes they'll just put the entire article in the newsletter. So I love that. I really like, it's not a newsletter, but there's a gentleman called Nat Bullard, and every year he puts out just this massive slide deck of like, it's like 900 pages of data, and it's all climate relevant, and it's like everything from climate tech to like physical impact. It's insane. And he just put his out for like looking back at 2025. So that's just a great data source in general. And then the last one that I really, really like is not climate specific, but it helped me when I went to work at a bank. I was feeling a little bit like, oh, I've never worked at a bank before. Like, and you have this idea of finance as this like thing that's like, you know, scary. And I started reading, there's a newsletter called Money Stuff, and it's Matt Levine writes it. And it just like, he was an investment banker, and it just kind of goes through all the silliness of finance in a way that kind of like, helps you understand how markets work and how financial products work, but also like a lot of it is so goofy and weird that like you kind of get a sense for like, okay, this isn't like some like high, far away thing that I can't participate in. Like, everyone is kind of figuring out a lot of this stuff at once. And so I really recommend that as well, though it's not climate specific. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for students in thinking about a career in climate at a bank, for internship recommendations, or you know, some of the things that you did that were really helpful in undergrad and during your MBA at Booth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was an undergrad, I did 2 research internships. And like, I was always like, oh, I wish I had gone to work for like a corporation for the summer, because then you get a return offer. But I ultimately was really glad that I did research. So I'm sure that like research grants are available within your programs. I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that where you can, because I think that there's just so many little pockets where there's an opportunity to become a specialist before the field has even fully formed. And I think that that is so exciting, and it's really an opportunity as like a young, early career professional, or even a person who hasn't graduated yet, to really like set yourself apart and define yourself to people outside of your university. And I think especially in climate, like those things are moving so rapidly, and you can find your niche and like just get really smart in it, and like that can be like so impactful to your career. Like, you could look back at all the research that other people are doing and learn it really well, but there's a lot of people doing that. Or you could like ask questions and research and like get on the ground and do the work in those little tiny pockets yourself, and then as it grows and grows and grows, like you're very advantaged in what you can do as a result, because like you're the expert at that point. So I would say like doing research and leveraging what you have at University of Chicago while you're here is really, really great. And I would say that would be my number one thing.
Awesome, thank you. We are at time, so I'm going to say thank you again, and then maybe she'll figure it out.
Thank you for having me.